So good day, everybody. Hi and welcome. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Building a Rock Solid Return on Investment Business Case to Enable Your Next. I'm Darren Edwards, Head of Product Operations at Syspro, and I'm really pleased to be here with Charles Brennan today, a Senior Analyst at Nucleus Research. Hi, Charles.
Hey, what's going on, Darren? How are you?
Yeah, good. So to explore a topic that's become extremely critical, not only just to CIOs and CFOs, but also to every product operations and business transformation leader across our ecosystem. And at Syspro, we've seen firsthand how the strongest business cases don't just survive budget scrutiny, they help drive momentum. They win cross-functional buy-in and align teams on outcomes, and most importantly, they prove value early and often. Now, in today's climate where spend is being challenged and priorities are shifting fast, the ability to quantify and communicate a return on an investment is not just a nice to have, it's actually your enabler of transformation. So Charles today will walk us through Nucleus Research's proven framework for measuring value, and then he'll look at some real world approaches to building the kind of business case that gets the green light. So we will have some questions at the end, so please drop them into the Q&A panel as we go. And with that, I'll let Charles dive in.
Hey, Darren, thank you very much for the introduction, and hello, everyone. Obviously, my name is Charles Brennan, and I'm the analyst here covering the ERP and supply chain space and all that kind of falls in between that. So for a quick background, and those who aren't really familiar with Nucleus, we're a global provider of technology research and advisory services that focuses on return on investment, right? And then this is mainly done through end user conversations, with individuals like yourself that really serve as a backbone for our products, right? As you can see, there at the second bullet line, right? We're the leader in evidence-based ROI analysis. We've published more than 1,000 case studies, our bread and butter. So really, we're putting out facts from actual customers that really serve as a backbone for all our products. A little bit about the history of our company. We were originally founded in 2000, based in Boston, but then we moved our headquarters to South Florida, Miami specifically. As you can see here also, we are primarily targeting business decision makers, the CFO. That's where our research is tailored to, the office of the CFO, the financial user, really understanding the financial value of deploying a software like Syspro. As you can see here with this little bullet point here, or picture at the NASBO sign, basically that means the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy, which is a fancy way of saying that we follow the same best practices accountants, CFOs do. So nothing we do here is we're talking about is proprietary. This is all general finance practices. So if we can move on to the next slide, at least where Darren gets in.
Cheers, Charles. So just a little bit about Syspro. So Syspro is an industry specialist ERP solution for manufacturers and distributors. We offer solutions designed to address those unique challenges of those industries. We also provide full visibility across businesses' operations, from inventory and manufacturing to financials and customer management, enabling businesses to make smarter decisions through those real-time insights from Syspro. We enable digital transformation. We're a big enabler of digital transformation by providing connectors and innovative tools that can help integrate and streamline business operations, which then result in improved customer success and also drive growth. We also leverage AI at Syspro to automate processes such as fraud detection, predictive analytics, and automate some document processing. And finally, Syspro is a cloud-ready and scalable business platform with a modular architecture that can be tailored to specific business needs, ensuring scalability and flexibility as our customers' businesses' needs grow. So with that, over to you, Charles, to let our listeners know what they'll be hearing about today.
Awesome. So going back to what Darren was saying earlier, so today we're really going to understand ROI. How do we calculate it? And there's a common misconception that you really had to have a finance background to ultimately assess ROI. But today we're really going to break it down and kind of make this an educational session for all those out there, and have you go back with a tool set to go analyze the value you've received from your software within your organization. So ultimately, we'll talk about the rules of thumb of building the business case, identifying benefits, mapping out those costs and benefit calculations there. Ultimately, how we will calculate the ROI and stuff of that nature. So first off, rules of thumb, like I mentioned. So we're going to look at identifying the top areas of benefit. So when you're building that business case, especially if you're a manufacturing or distribution company, really understand what are the biggest pain points you're now realizing and how can software help you out. And so really, when you start with that mindset, you really understand and you have a targeted approach to what you're using software to do. Next step, obviously, is estimating the costs and the benefits. So when you're building that business case, you need to understand, right? So what are certain costs? What personnel costs are we going to involve in this? What is the software cost? We're going to get into this a little bit later, but just from a high level, right? And then what are the benefits, right? If we're going to make financial processes more efficient, what in terms of time savings for our employees, what is that going to look like? Stuff of that nature. And that kind of leads me into my third section of calculating the metrics. How do we calculate ROI, payback period, stuff of that nature? So this is the general thesis of what we're going to talk about today. So if we can move to the next slide, please. So perfect, right here, step one, identify top benefit areas. So right, as from Nucleus perspective, we see it in two ways, right? Breadth and repeatability. These are the main factors that drive value, right? How much does the ERP kind of extend within the business and operation, and how much do employees utilize the software every day? That's the repeatability aspect of it. So if we can go to the next slide here, we'll break down breadth. So ultimately, you see here, how many people will this application affect? The more people, applications, or channel a project touches, obviously the greater return on investment, right? So organizations that deploy an ERP software for their manufacturing, their finance, procurement, quality, everything of that nature. If you kind of deploy it from that perspective and it touches many parts of your operation, then there's a greater potential return on your investment because it is affecting so many areas. So then that kind of leads into the next section on repeatability. How often will individuals use the software? Ultimately, right, the greater frequency individuals use it on, the greater potential return. Think about those in the finance department, right? If they're utilizing the software every day to, get numbers, crunch numbers for executive meetings, just meetings in general, that is going to drive a potential value because individuals are utilizing the software every day. So if you think about it from the opposite perspective, those who don't use the software often aren't going to drive that much of an ROI. So think about it from that perspective of how deep is the ERP software affecting our organization? And then how often are individuals utilizing the software? So that's really kind of how we're going to understand breadth and repeatability as the two main factors of driving that value for the software investment. So if we can go to the next slide, please. We're going to talk about costs and benefits, right? Unfortunately, the sad part about deploying software is that, and technology in general, is that there's a pretty heavy cost associated with it. But we're going to kind of break it down and understand here. So next slide, please. Assessing the cost, obviously. Please next slide. So I have a pretty basic, categories of how we look at, how everyone basically generally looks at specific cost categories, right? So if you think about it from software costs, right, you think about it, what are you paying pre-start? What is that first licensing fee? And then year one, year two, and onwards. That's generally how that works. Hardware, you think about having an on-premise system. How much is that going to cost to get up and running? Stuff of that nature. Personnel. You think about those that could be directly involved in the implementation. Those that are kind of those key value users early on, the power users that kind of establish the software, understand the kinks of it, try to break the software, stuff of that nature. Those that are really heavily involved in the pre-start. And as you can see, those are individuals that are, a category that can be either one-time and recurring as well. So if you think about it, there's an initial time investment at the beginning of a software deployment where individuals are spending hundreds of hours working on the software, figuring out the kinks, like I mentioned. And then if you think about it from year one, year two, and onward perspective, those same individuals could be tweaking the software, understanding new updates that vendors like Syspro are putting out, and ultimately tailoring the software and improving it along the way. So that's kind of an example we can look at as a big one-time cost and a recurring cost. I think about it from consulting. That's also a one-time and recurring cost. So organizations, when they deploy a software, they might hire an implementation manager or a change management consultant to help out with that aspect of it. So organizations will typically spend most of that at the pre-start, but those that can continue on during recurring, say if you want to add new features, integrate your CRM, if you want to go deeper, integrate a WMS, TMS, stuff of that nature, you might hire a consultant to help out there. So that's kind of the general understanding of consulting. You think training, right? Individuals need to understand the software in order to realize value from it, right? Really understand what they're utilizing within. So organizations can set up, maybe it's 50 hours per employee to understand the software, whether that's manufacturing individuals, those managing inventory, whatever that might be, really understand and set that time out of how much are we going to be training individuals, are they going to utilize the software, stuff of that nature. And if you look at other, that's a funny one here. You can kind of look at this in many ways, right? The funny kind of statement I always have, say if there's a pizza party you have to celebrate the success of an implementation or the success of, the first 6 months of the implementation, that can be something you can add to the other costs here, right? Because at the end of the day, we are speaking to the office of the CFO. So when you're building that business case, it really needs to be bulletproof. You need to make sure you have every item that you spent on this allotted and accounted for when you do that calculation. So stuff of that nature. Maybe you think about flying out consultants to do the project. That can be categorized as other as well. So that's just a quick rundown of specific cost categories that individuals like yourself should be aware of when you're figuring out, estimating those costs, getting those in order. Really make sure you get kind of granular in terms of understanding, okay, what are we investing in here from a holistic standpoint? It's more going to be more than software. It's going to be the personnel to help implement it. It's going to be the training of individuals. So really understand it from that, so you have a bulletproof cost calculation. Next slide, please. So now we're going to assess the benefits, the better part of that. So if we can think about it, we look at benefits in one of two ways. It's either direct benefits, stuff that we can see as direct line items, or indirect benefits, sorts as, efficiency gains, stuff of that nature. So if we can look here, benefit examples we typically see from, from that direct perspective. If individuals or organization is more efficient and they optimize certain processes, maybe as they grow, they don't need to add certain headcounts, right? If organization grows from $10 million in revenue to $50 million in revenue, typically you need to onboard new individuals to kind of keep up with the pace of the organization, right? But now if you have software to help you out, make you more efficient in terms of maybe it's financial processing, manufacturing execution, right? You don't necessarily need to have to onboard 4 to 5 new individuals as you scale up in terms of revenue or in customer growth. One that I see often, reduction in inventory carrying costs. This is typically seen because organizations either they rely on pen and paper reporting for inventory, stuff of that nature, kind of legacy processes and ways of approaching how do we understand the total nature of our inventory. So here's a big one where software comes in, showcases stuff like obsolete inventory, dead stock, ultimately making that process of how you manage inventory and how we look at inventory costs differently. So I'm constantly seeing reductions in inventory carrying costs, where that's ranging from 5% to 20%, and those can carry some significant benefits to customers. Think about it from a financial perspective. Avoided compliance penalties through real-time audit trails and built-in tax regulatory rules. Going back to what I was saying earlier on how you maybe approach things from prior to deploying software. It's kind of like a legacy, old way of doing it, where very pen and paper driven, kind of doing regulatory reporting maybe on the last day of the month, stuff of that nature, where you're not really being as efficient of it. But right now, if you have the ability to have these real-time audit trails and these built-in tax and regulation rules, you're more inclined to avoid these compliance penalties. And then one that typically customers see is cost of onboarding an old legacy solution, right? If we go back to organizations at scale, that's typically possibly done through an M&A activity. Think about large manufacturers or distributors. They're buying organizations and they're rolling up these organizations under their umbrella, and sometimes they might have 20, 30 ERP systems. Now I'm being a little overzealous here, but you get where I'm coming at, where organizations acquire businesses, they grow. Now they have, a bunch of different software systems, and they don't have a clear, golden data, I would say a data warehouse like you would, where you funneling all your information back to. So organizations typically see a lot of cost savings from offboarding those legacy solutions, maybe consolidating everything to Syspro ERP, stuff of that nature. So that's a big way where you can see direct benefits, stuff that your CFO can see on the line item, stuff that he can say, hey, you know what, that is a direct saving. I can feel that. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Next is what I talked about earlier, kind of those indirect benefits, stuff that might be a little harder to feel, stuff that you're maybe a little iffy on, but they still drive value for your company. So when you're building that business case, obviously focus on those direct benefits, but don't disregard those indirect ones too, because those can add up as well. And we'll talk about more of that later. So first, you can see here, reduction in time. These are some examples, reductions in time needed to process procurement and purchasing approvals. Think about stuff of, reducing time spent on vendor payments. Ultimately, making more processes more efficient and those involved in those processes more efficient, right? So if you think, reducing time spent on ad hoc financial adjustments or journal entries, financial and operations teams are more empowered and proactive. That's a very, very indirect benefit, stuff that you really can't maybe attach time to, but it's more of that, feeling of individuals being more excited to come to work every day because they have the ability to drive more impact with the company, right? Because they're utilizing software to do more. So, which kind of leads me into this next slide here of, kind of measuring these benefits. We built out this graph here of measuring them based on believability and impact, right? As we can once again see the direct and indirect at the bottom there, direct savings, stuff that is most believable, reduction in costs, stuff of that nature. Stuff like what I mentioned earlier, you bring back to the CFO, he directly understands and he can seize the cost benefit there. Indirect savings, increase in worker productivity. Think about from a manufacturing, a line worker. If you make the line to simply process that much more efficient, individuals are able to work more, add more value to the business. And the funny one here, very indirect savings. I don't mean to call it the managers of the world here, but increase in manager productivity. Think about if we save a manager 30 minutes a day, is he going to spend that time adding more value to the business, or is he going to take that time to maybe wind down from the day because he's been quite busy lately? You think about manufacturing companies, or they're quite complex, a lot of moving parts, and managers got their hands full. So if they save 30 minutes, are they going to add that back to the business? So that we see that typically as more as a very indirect saving. Harder to kind of prove to the CFO at the end of the day. Please go back another slide. Oh, okay. Well, so once again, direct savings, tangible action, stuff that you can see from a budget number. Once again, eliminating a cost, redeploying an employee, closing a factory, obtaining a discount, eliminating a fine, stuff of that nature where you're able to see tangible benefits. Thinking about it, if you have 30 employees doing certain finance tasks, and now you're able to do the same amount of workload with 10 employees, how do you redeploy those 20 individuals to more value-added tasks, or maybe you offboard those individuals? So stuff of that nature, right? Going back into stuff that we can really see, stuff that is tangible, that the CFO can feel and understand when you build that business case. And if we can go to the next slide, we'll get a little bit more breakdown in indirect saving, right? It's, as I was mentioning, it's really an action that increases a worker's productivity, a single step that exists, but is typically harder to calculate than you offboarding, a certain legacy solution, stuff of that nature. It's gonna require, another level of understanding. So as we can see some examples here, you automated the invoice matching and exception handling, self-service reporting, real-time inventory visibility across locations, automated purchase order and approvals and alerts. So you think about here, it's some two big ones to call out, right? Real-time inventory visibility across locations. Think about you guys as organizations that have multiple sites, multiple distribution centers. How do you get visibility in one place from everything that's going on between all those areas, right? If you reduce time spent gathering that information from whether that's, a WMS system, an ERP system in one area, right? If you can consolidate that, if you get real-time access across all these locations, that reduces time spent gathering information there. You think of self-service reporting. If individuals don't have to go to IT to run certain reports or create a certain instance where you can run certain data analysis and whatnot, if you're able to kind of do that yourself and empower those individuals, that's less time having that work about work, right? Having those conversations internally about saying, hey, can you help me build out this report here? I can be an individual now that is empowered and goes and does that within the ERP software myself. I don't have to rely on a subject matter expert to ultimately help me tailor these reports. So that's when we kind of look at indirect savings. When you're building that business case, your organization better than anyone else. What are these areas that we are hoping software is going to help us increase productivity, right? Really understand it from that perspective. So this next slide here, this is when you're understanding, how are we going to measure these benefits when you're looking at your deployment of the software. Here are some techniques that we've seen over at Nucleus are the most efficient in terms of that, right? As obviously the first one, direct observation pilot site. If you can go boots on the ground, see what's going on at a certain warehouse or a certain distribution center or a certain manufacturing plant, you can see the value, right? If more individuals are more efficient, your line, you're putting out more lines per day on a manufacturing perspective, you can see that. That's tangible. Corporate history. That's another one. So, right, going back to, your organization and the individuals within your organization. Are they going to be utilizing the software? Are they bought in, right? You think about change management and how that's, obviously you're changing processes, but you're also changing the minds of individuals, right? So understanding the culture of your organization, are those individuals going to be bought in there? If we think about in terms of being more efficient in terms of some processes, are those individuals going to utilize the software to be more efficient, right? At the end of the day, it is individuals driving that change. Surveys, that's another way we can see measuring some benefits. You can pull out surveys to individuals within your organization, ask them certain questions on how are they utilizing the software, what are they doing it for, what certain processes are they more efficient at, stuff of that nature. Case studies, really understanding those that have been there and done that, right? If you see an organization similar size and stature have deployed Syspro ERP and they've realized value, if they've approached it in a certain way, maybe you adopt those same strategies. Maybe you think about deploying the software in that same way. So really seeing who's done that before, who's been successful, and then kind of relating that to your own business. And this is kind of dropping down beneath the low, less quality techniques, benchmarking data, which is great and all, but if you think about it, like if I said to you that the average shoe size in America is 10, is 10 inches, not everyone's going to fall in between that line, right? People might have bigger feet, smaller feet. So really understanding that benchmark data is great and all, but your organization is going to be different, right? There's definitely different anomalies, stuff of that nature, maybe more complex, less complex, whatever that might be. So really, when you look at benchmarking data, just understand that it might not necessarily relate to your company, but it will sound great. It will give you a good understanding of maybe the direction we can head in towards in terms of evaluating the benefits. And maybe if it's ERP software, does very well at driving down those inventory carrying costs. Understanding that might be a North Star for you guys. It could be different, or you could decrease costs more, less, whatever that might be. It will give you a good general direction. And obviously, as we keep going down here, educated guess, uneducated guess, it's speaking to a psychic, stuff of this nature. At the end of the day, really seeing direct observations, going back to organizations that have been there, done that. Knowing your organization, and then vendor supplied estimates. At the end of the day, vendor supplied estimates are great and all, but you really have to understand where your organization is going to go, understand the value it's going to realize from the software deployment there. So really looking at it from your perspective, right? Because your business better than the vendor will know your business. So rather than relying on those estimates to bring back to your CFO, go back to those direct observations, go back to those surveys, corporate history that you have. So that's just kind of some techniques for measuring benefits when you go out there and do it yourself. Next slide, please. Obviously, we're going to dive deeper here into measuring the benefits. So inefficient transfer of time. So this is interesting here. So we think about improving efficiency, right? Ultimately, the fact of life is that time saved does not equal time worked. We think about it from, I always like to joke with the example of a receptionist, right? If you save them an hour a day, are they going to spend that hour a day, finding new leads, adding more value to the business? Or are they going to spend that hour going on Facebook before they leave at the end of the day? So really understand the business, going back to, your organization better than anyone else. So when you're creating that, breakdown of the indirect cost savings, understand that like I mentioned, time saved does not equal time worked. But then the other side of the organization, a receptionist could save an hour a day and could add more value back to the business. It could be generating more leads, could be doing more for the organization, could be doing more for the boss, whatever that may be. Your organization better than anyone. And we typically see ranging from either 10% to 100% to adjust time saved to time worked. If we go to the next slide, we can break it down more. So why are these important? Why are correction factors important, right? Because everyone discounts indirect benefits, especially your CFO, right? You could initially estimate, right, this correction factor could be 10%, but then your project manager really wants to be conservative and say, we think it's 7%. And then your business sponsor comes in, wants to be even more conservative, say it's 1%. And then ultimately the CFO just assumes everyone's wrong and has overestimated and puts it at 1%. So really correction factors allows everyone to be, understand the initial benefit, then on the discount, that benefit back to the value of the organization, right? So really understand, okay, are we more efficient, but are these individuals putting more time back into the organization? Simple as that. As we can get a breakdown here, and obviously this varies by type of company, type of employee, stuff of that nature. So you think about an assembly line worker. Those individuals that are made more efficient can add that work and time back to the business 100%, right? If you're able to process 200 lines in a day now, for example, faster, then you could add that work back, and maybe now you're doing 250 per day, stuff of that nature. You think about it from a VP and operations manager, going back to what I was saying earlier, where you think an operations manager, he's got his hands full. It's a complex organization, a complex manufacturing plant. So if he's saving time on inventory reporting or financial reporting, is 100% of his time going to go back into value added for the business? Maybe he takes a stroll, after the day to, clear his mind before he drives home, stuff of that nature. And if you think about it from, I have a breakdown of France versus Germany versus America. There's always this misconception that French people don't work hard, right? But there's an actuality, if they are more efficient in a lot of their processes, they will actually add that value back to the businesses. You think about Germany. So they have strict labor and union regulations. So if they are more efficient and they do save time, they aren't necessarily held accountable to bring back that time saved to the business. You think about it from America. Has this work hustle culture. So if you're able to save a lot of individuals' time in America, they're probably putting it back into the business. So it might vary from type of company, type of employee, and you need to understand that. Going back to you understand your business. Go to the next slide, please. So here we're going to calculate the metrics here. Fun part. So if we can see here, going back to the indirect benefits we see here, and this is how we typically calculate it, right? So hours per day spent on a task, right? If we spend 20 minutes a day on a tasks, we do this 260 days per year. That's the amount of working days annually, and we have 15 individuals doing a certain task, and their salary rate is about $22.50 an hour. So if we save them 75% from this new benefit, and we add on the correction factor, it's pretty high here. You see 90%. So it's pretty believable that these individuals that are, getting more time back to the business, they're going to add it back in terms of improving the operation, stuff of that nature. And we can see the total cost saving around $19,000, almost around $20,000 in savings here. So that's kind of how we calculate it from that gap perspective on how we can assess time savings and how we can get the costs from that. If we can move to the next slide, please. So here's something going back to what I was mentioning about direct cost savings. Stuff like reduced inventory carrying costs, right? So we can see the average annual carrying cost per $100 in inventory is about $3.50. So if we know we have $2 million worth of inventory, and we're able to plan better, understand where we have dead stock, where we have obsolete stock, and we're able to reduce our inventory by 15%, that's an annual saving of $10,000, $10,500, right? Then obviously this is going to vary per organization. This is just a very bare bones example, but really understanding that these reduction in carrying costs are going to drive significant savings for your organization. So that's typically how we break that cost calculation down there. Go to the next slide, please. So here, this is the fun part here, how we calculate ROI. So as you can see here, it's calculated over a 3-year perspective, right? So we see the net benefits over year 1, year 2, year 3, averaged out, divided by the initial costs. That gives you the ROI. But there's this misconception here that we see organizations, calculating it out over, a 5-year period. They don't do an annualized ROI. That's what you have to do when you're assessing the value of your software. You got to understand what's the annualized benefit we're realizing per year. And why we typically do it over a 3-year period, is that typically in year 1 you're realizing less value because individuals are still getting used to the software. We talked about that change management, stuff of that's still happening. Maybe you're still paying consultants to help you with the post implementation, the onboarding there. So maybe around year 2, year 3 is when you start realizing more value of this from the software. So that's where we kind of get, understand that breakdown of, we recommend having that 3-year horizon, but we use that time, period consistent with your organization standards. So that's how we generally calculate ROI. And if we can go to the next slide, please. Payback period. So payback period is very interesting. You can look at it as kind of like a running tally of how much you put into the software in terms of costs and how much benefit you're getting off, right? If the second The savings come from the software that equals the total amount of costs is when you realize the payback period. So it's an excellent measure of risks, should be a key measurement. And ultimately, like I said, this is a time period needed before the net savings equals the initial total cost. So understand when that time period is. And this is going to kind of lead me into my next slide here of that. I know I've been giving you a whole presentation around ROI and how that's the holy grail here, but actually payback period is stronger than ROI. So if you think about it, CFOs really care about money now, not something that is potential, in the future that we can realize, 3 years down the line, hypothetically. So really understanding, leading with that when you're building these business cases, when you're presenting it to the CFO, these hold the biggest value to them, and this is something that they can feel and understand. So stuff what we can see, shorten the deal. Every month you delay, it's another lost $100,000. Unseat an existing application. You've already covered your payback period with an old system. You reduce risk, bias now, and you'll cover your costs in a few months. So stuff of that nature, right? Leading with payback period, that's the biggest driver. That's something that the CFO can feel. Next slide, please. Room for improvement. So obviously, when you're doing this calculation, you might be a little unsatisfied with the return that you might get, right? So if you think about it, there's also this disclaimer around, if it's not over 100%, we didn't make our money back. Actually, if it's anything that's positive, you've realized a return on your investment. So what if I were to tell you that, your investment account that you have $1 million in is up 10%? That's an additional $100,000 on top of the $1 million you already have. That's a good thing. So even if it was only a 10% return on investment, that's still a lot of benefits you are realizing. So when you are calculating this, and you might not be satisfied with the answer, with your potential ROI when you're building that business case, maybe redirect how you do things, right? To go back to deploying the modules that make sense first. A lot of times, especially with ERP software, they kind of sell you this comprehensive vision that covers everything from manufacturing, inventory, finance, procurement, everything, right? That all sounds great. But if you're not going to utilize the software, going back to the breadth and repeatability, if you're not going to repeatedly use a certain module, maybe it might not make sense to deploy it right away. Maybe think about it more down the line. Maybe you deploy it 3 years, 4 years after, when it makes sense and when your organization has matured to a certain point. So that is a good way to, maybe improve your business case and how you're going to approach it. Maybe you only deploy one module. Maybe you only deploy a manufacturing module to start off. What is that biggest pain point your organization? Start there at the end of the day. There's actually incremental value in scaling up a deployment. So you start with a core finance or core manufacturing module, and then later you choose to implement a supply chain management major module later on, going back to what I was saying earlier. So that's a big thing, understanding what is the biggest pain point in the company now, and then start with that, move on. And then ultimately continuously assess your needs. Going back to maybe your company has experienced growth. Maybe you guys are more mature now. Maybe you do deploy a supply chain management module. Maybe you do get more deep into supply chain planning because you are more efficient in your manufacturing, your distribution, your finance. So understand where your company has gone and where it's going to go. Ultimately, with compliance requirements changing, think about the tariffs are hitting. Maybe there's certain modules that you can add onto your software to help you reduce cost, to help you be more efficient. And that's going to help you drive a greater ROI when you're building the business case, saying, hey, listen, our company has actually grown over the past couple of years. Maybe we should deploy this manufacturing or finance module. This is going to help us out. This is going to save us a lot of time. So really understand that, understand what's the biggest pain point your organization, and go from there. Next slide, please. So fixing a negative ROI. Going back to what I was saying earlier, obviously anything that's above zero is positive, but then you might go into a situation where you realize negative ROI. So how do you fix that, right? First and foremost, you can ask for a change in price from the software vendor. That's obviously easier said than done, but that is a good way to approach it. Maybe your software costs are $100,000 annually. Maybe you get it reduced down to 95 or 90. That can be an easy one. Reduce pre-start costs. Moving costs out of the pre-start column when you do the calculation helps increase ROI. Maybe you spread out training from pre-start to year one. Maybe you spent 300 hours per employee. Could be 5 employees becoming super users of the software. Maybe you spread that out from 6 months during the pre-start and then 6 months in during year one. That will help increase the ROI. Evaluate productivity. Is the correction factor aggressive? Is a product a benefit estimate too low? Going back to, you guys know your organizations better than everyone. So when you go back and say, hey, listen, are we being too aggressive here saying that these individuals are going to put 90% of their time back into the organization, stuff of that nature? Really understand your organization, where people are going to be more efficient. Are they going to add value back? It's really understanding the culture of individuals, and ultimately expand the opportunity. Can you deploy to more people? Going back to the breadth and repeatability. If more individuals can touch the software, right? If you have multiple manufacturing plants and you can get your software out to everyone with on the line, or every individual that manages finance across your organization, especially if it's international, there's a potential increase in ROI because more individuals are touching it, more individuals are realizing value, and more individuals are bringing their time saved to the business and adding value in the growth there. So those are ways you can fix a negative ROI. So pulling it together, right? We talked a lot about finance today and how we calculate ROI, the metrics there. So this is, we're going to wrap it up right now with pulling it together, right? So I think what works today, these are some best practices that we would recommend. Business cases aren't difficult. They're just structured. So going back to what I was talking about earlier, right? Really understanding the top areas of benefits. Where are we going to drive value with these deployments? What are the costs and benefits? How do we estimate that, right? What are we going to see as our implementation costs? Are we going to use consultants? Think about that. You build a business case, and ultimately calculating the metrics. Going back to ROI, how do you calculate that over a 3-year period? What is your payback period? Stuff of that nature. Worst case scenario is your best business case. Once again, I will beat this into a pulp of talking about, stuff that frustrates you the most is actually going to drive the biggest value, right? If you are inefficient in terms of how you manage your finances, how you do financial reporting, how you do financial analysis, maybe deploying the software will drive the most benefit for your company. Maybe it will save, 20 hours of time for your top finance folks to do certain reportings, stuff of that nature. Understanding where the biggest pain points are in your business will help you drive the best value when you're building this business case. Understanding, hey, maybe how can software help us optimize X, Y, and Z process? That is where you're going to realize value. And then, we see here a few strong benefits are better than a lot of weaker ones, right? We can pound out 600 benefits organizations can realize from deploying this software, but at the end of the day, a lot of them can be weak, stuff that you really can't measure, stuff that the CFO is going to discount at the end of the day, right? Start with maybe 3, right? We're going back to the reduction in inventory carrying costs, going back to individuals being more efficient in terms of financial reporting. Really understand that. What breadth are we leading to? What repeatability? If we have a lot of individuals utilizing the software and it's maybe five folks are going to drive a lot of value at first, that might be it. So, right, starting with a few strong points, three top benefits are a lot stronger than 10 weak ones at the end of the day. Rapid deployment and high usability. Going back to individuals knowing your culture, are they going to utilize the software? Because if individuals don't utilize the software, you're not going to realize a positive ROI at the end of the day. So understand, how is the software going to make individuals more efficient? How are they going to like in dealing with the user interface, stuff of that nature? And you think about rapid deployment. So when you're going to approach, your implementation of an ERP, make sure you get all your ducks in order, right? Clean your data beforehand. Understand map out how are we going to deploy the software, stuff of that nature, little kinks. Understand that, so when you get time for deployment, you're quicker, you're getting it done faster. Limit consulting and customization as part of the upfront deployment. Consultants, they are a big cost suck in terms of implementing software, and especially ERP and supply chain software from my experience. So maybe if you are able to redirect those costs internally, so if you're able to have a dedicated team that is focused on the software, that might be more cost efficient than you going out to hire an Accenture or an Ernst & Young, a PwC to help you out with the deployment. So think about that. Think about if we can kind of gather these individuals that will also be super users, but will also work on the implementation. They know the business already. That might be a better avenue to approach than hiring someone that's going to come from an outside, gives you an outside perspective, doesn't really know the business, and is just there. I would say ultimately just to collect the paycheck and to help you get the deployment, but they're not really urgent to get it done, to get it across the goal line as those internally might be. So think about it like that. And going back to the winning business case has a crisp value message. Once again, having those strong benefits will outweigh the weaker ones 10 times out of 10. understanding that, hey, software is going to help us reduce costs in these areas. It's going to make us efficient in these areas, and lead with that. Those are the strongest messages, right? How can we improve efficiency? How can we reduce costs? Ultimately, that's going to drive an increase in profitability. And the CFO is going to understand and appreciate that type of tone and approach those conversations, right? Understanding what's the value you're going to get from the software, and bring that type of approach to conversations with your CFO, to those high-level decision makers, stuff of that nature. Next slide, please. Obviously, where to learn more. We are a global provider of technology research and advisory services that focuses on ROI. So, it's nature for us to have our own ROI tool. So roitool.com, you can help calculate the ROI yourself. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn if you have any questions. I'd be glad to help you. Jump on a call. You can read our published research at nucleusresearch.com. I've been covering the ERP space for quite some time, and I have predecessors that have done so for years before me. So there's a bevy of research you guys can access from the website. So go out there, check it out. We even have an AI tool where you can kind of query questions, have conversations maybe with some of our reports. And then you could take a free self-quoted, guided course at roiuniversity.com. Basically going through what I said to you today. Actually, our CEO leads the university course there. So if you want to learn more about ROI, check out roiuniversity.com. But yeah, I think that's it from my end. Jared, if you go to the next slide, please. Awesome.
Cheers, Charles. Well, that was certainly packed with practical insights. A very, very strong reminder for me of going through the same process with my business case for Syspro. So yeah, I thought I'd reserve that to the memory banks, but it was all coming back
Awesome.
there. So great insights, Charles. Okay, so as Charles has said, ROI isn't just a finance metric; it's an invaluable strategic tool in terms of getting your projects over the line, whether it's ERP investment that's looking to be done, or any other kind of investment. An ROI is critical to getting the decisions made. Now at Syspro, we work with thousands of manufacturers and distributors globally who are using Syspro platform not just to digitize, but to grow smarter, more resilient, and more responsive. Now, whether that's in support of modern supply chains, automating workflows, or planning solutions, we've learned that a solid return on investment business case has to be quantifiable and relatable to your executive team. And to Charles's point, you've got to make sure that those big points, those important points, the big wins are at the top of the list of that business case in order to get those decisions made. So thanks again, Charles. So here's a few examples of our Syspro customers that have in the past built their own rock solid business cases and chosen Syspro, and as a result returned significant value to their organization. So the first one's a company called Kega Group. They're an industrial equipment manufacturer in South Africa. They've experienced 157% revenue growth and an over 8-fold profit increase just by upgrading to Syspro. And they did that by eliminating manual processes and improving their inventory controls and reducing their fraud risk. The second customer is a customer called TriStar Plastics. They're a plastics manufacturer in the US. And these guys saw a 90% increase in revenue per employee after they built a business case to support that, and then as part of their implementation. They scaled their operations with a minimal headcount. They improved visibility, they improved cost control as well. And the third company, the last company, as an example of where they've delivered on the return on investment, is a company called Benchmade Knives, who are a precision manufacturing company in the US. They realized a 75% faster year-end close and an 85% improvement in the speed at which they closed their general ledger. And they did this by streamlining the accounts function, streamlining the production scheduling, and introduced real-time job tracking as well. So all of these relate to those big cases that Charles mentioned that then had a deliverable or a measurable deliverable against them that they could then realize through their investment in Syspro. So these are just a few examples which showcase our impact in real terms on revenue and profit growth, hard savings and productivity boosts. You can see all of these case studies and find all of these case studies online on our syspro.com website. So I think in summary, a solid business case backed by a sound investment can translate into some serious business success. I think with that, we just move to Q&A if there are any questions.
Shut the chat here.
Okay, we didn't pick up any Q&A in the chat.
As I was mentioning earlier, if individuals do have any questions they have, maybe post webinar, they can always reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to address them there as well. I just want to throw that out there.
Fabulous. So I just want to say a big thanks again for joining us, and a big thank you to Charles and the team at Nucleus for this research. It's been very educational, and I hope it's been very useful for everybody. Thanks again, Charles.
Awesome. Thank you.